From the outside, Daniel and Emily Harper's life was the picture of perfection. A beautiful home in the suburbs, 2 adorable children, and a marriage that seemed unshakable. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming, cracks that would soon shatter their world in the most unexpected way. When trust is broken by the person closest to you, how do you pick up the pieces? This is not just a story of infidelity. It's a raw, heart-wrenching exploration of love, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of choices made in moments of weakness. It's a tale of how the deepest wounds can lead to the most profound healing, if you're brave enough to face them. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Inside the cozy living room of the Harper residence, everything seemed picture-perfect. Daniel Harper, a devoted husband and father of 2, sat on the couch, scrolling through his laptop. His wife, Emily, was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. Their life was a tapestry of routines, laughter, and shared dreams, or so Daniel thought. Daniel had always prided himself on being a good husband. He worked hard as a financial analyst, providing for his family, and made sure to carve out time for Emily and their children. Emily, a freelance graphic designer, was the glue that held their family together. She was warm, caring, and always seemed to know how to make everyone feel loved. Their marriage, though not without its challenges, had always felt unshakable. But lately, Daniel had noticed subtle changes in Emily. She seemed distant, lost in thought, and her phone, which he once carelessly left around, was now always within arm's reach. Daniel brushed it off as stress. After all, life was busy, and they were both juggling work and parenting. He trusted her completely. Trust was the foundation of their marriage, and he never imagined it could ever be broken. It was a Friday evening when Daniel's world began to unravel. Emily had gone out for a girls' night with her best friend, Sarah. Daniel stayed home with the kids, helping them with homework and tucking them into bed. As he tidied up the living room, Emily's phone buzzed on the coffee table. Curiosity got the better of him, and he glanced at the screen. A message from an unknown number lit up. "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again?" Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He stared at the message, his mind racing. It had to be a mistake. Maybe it was a wrong number. But deep down, a gnawing suspicion began to take root. He tried to push it aside, telling himself he was overreacting. But the seed of doubt had been planted. When Emily returned home later that night, Daniel couldn't bring himself to confront her. Instead, he watched her closely, searching for signs of guilt or deception. She seemed her usual self, laughing and recounting her evening with Sarah. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's suspicions grew. He began noticing little things: Emily's sudden interest in dressing up for work meetings, her frequent trips to the grocery store that took longer than usual, and the way she avoided his gaze when he asked about her day. One evening, while Emily was in the shower, Daniel made a decision he never thought he'd make. He unlocked her phone. His hands trembled as he scrolled through her messages. What he found shattered him. There were countless texts between Emily and his best friend, Mark. The messages were intimate, filled with longing and promises of stolen moments. Photos, dates, and plans for future meetups. It was all there, laid bare in front of him. Daniel felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Mark had been his friend for over a decade, a man he trusted implicitly. They had shared countless memories, from college parties to family barbecues. And Emily, his wife, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish, had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. The next morning, Daniel confronted Emily. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "I know about you and Mark," he said, his tone steady but laced with pain. Emily's face paled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized there was no point in denying it. "Daniel, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It just happened. I never meant to hurt you." "How long?" Daniel demanded, his voice rising. "How long has this been going on?" Emily hesitated before answering. 6 months. 6 months. The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. For half a year, his wife and his best friend had been lying to him, sneaking around behind his back. The betrayal was unbearable. The days that followed were a blur of anger, tears, and sleepless nights. Daniel moved into the guest room, unable to bear the thought of sharing a bed with Emily. The children, sensing the tension, became quiet and withdrawn. The once happy home was now filled with an oppressive silence. Daniel's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. He loved Emily, but the betrayal cut too deep. He replayed every moment of their marriage, questioning whether any of it had been real. Meanwhile, Emily begged for forgiveness, promising to end things with Mark and do whatever it took to save their marriage. But Daniel wasn't sure if he could ever trust her again. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Mark. The man he had called his brother, his confidant, had stabbed him in the back in the cruelest way possible. The anger simmered inside him, growing hotter with each passing day. Finally, he decided he couldn't avoid it any longer. He needed to face Mark. He texted Mark, asking to meet at their usual spot, a quiet park where they often went to talk or play basketball. Mark replied almost immediately, agreeing without hesitation. He had no idea what was coming. When Daniel arrived at the park, Mark was already there, leaning against his car with a casual smile. "Hey man, long time no see," Mark greeted, clapping Daniel on the shoulder. But Daniel didn't smile back. His expression was cold, his eyes blazing with fury. "We need to talk," Daniel said, his voice low and steady. Mark's smile faded. "What's going on? You look pissed." Daniel took a step closer, his fists clenched at his sides. "I know about you and Emily." Mark's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, the two men stood in silence, the weight of Daniel's words hanging heavy in the air. "How could you?" Daniel finally exploded, his voice shaking with rage. "You were my best friend. I trusted you." Mark looked down, unable to meet Daniel's gaze. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. It just happened." "A mistake," Daniel repeated, his voice rising. "You've been sleeping with my wife for 6 months. That's not a mistake, Mark. That's a choice. You chose to betray me." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know I messed up. I never meant to hurt you. I don't know what happened. Emily and I got close, and things spiraled out of control." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Get out of my life. I never want to see you again." Without waiting for a response, Daniel turned and walked away, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. Confronting Mark had been necessary, but it didn't erase the pain. If anything, it only deepened the wound. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Daniel. He oscillated between anger, sadness, and numbness. He threw himself into work, trying to distract himself from the chaos in his personal life. But no matter how busy he kept himself, the thoughts of Emily and Mark haunted him. Emily, meanwhile, was desperate to fix things. She started therapy, both individually and as a couple, and begged Daniel to give their marriage a chance. "I love you," she told him one evening, tears streaming down her face. "I made a terrible mistake, but I want to make it right. Please, Daniel, don't give up on us." Daniel looked at her, his heart torn. Part of him still loved her, still remembered the life they had built together. But the other part of him couldn't forget the betrayal. "I don't know if I can trust you again," he admitted, his voice heavy with pain. One night, after another tense therapy session, Daniel reached his breaking point. He sat alone in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. The smiles in those pictures felt like a cruel joke now. How could something that had seemed so perfect fall apart so completely? He thought about his children, about the life they deserved. Could he and Emily ever rebuild what they had? Or was their marriage beyond repair? As the hours passed, Daniel made a decision. He would give their marriage one last chance, not because he was sure it would work, but because he owed it to himself and his children to try. But he also knew that forgiveness wouldn't come easily. It would take time, effort, and a willingness to confront the pain head on. The journey to healing was slow and painful. Daniel and Emily attended therapy regularly, working through their issues one session at a time. They learned to communicate openly, to address the underlying problems that had led to the affair. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when Daniel wanted to walk away. But he stayed, determined to see it through. Mark, meanwhile, was out of their lives for good. Daniel cut all ties with him, and Emily did the same. It was a necessary step, but it left a void in Daniel's life. He had lost not only his wife's trust, but also his closest friend. Months turned into a year, and slowly, things began to change. The anger and pain didn't disappear completely, but they became more manageable. Daniel and Emily learned to rebuild their relationship, one small step at a time. They started dating again, rediscovering the love that had brought them together in the first place. It wasn't the same as before, it couldn't be. The scars of betrayal would always be there, a reminder of what they had been through. But in a strange way, those scars also made their bond stronger. They had faced the worst and come out the other side. Daniel and Emily's attempts to rebuild their marriage were fragile, like a delicate glass sculpture that could shatter at the slightest touch. They started small, date nights, honest conversations, and shared moments with their children. But the shadow of the affair loomed over them, a constant reminder of the betrayal. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to Daniel. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel hesitated, staring at the horizon. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm willing to try. For us, for the kids, for the life we once had." Emily nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes, Daniel. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful you're giving me a chance." Daniel reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a step forward. Despite their progress, Daniel couldn't shake the lingering doubts. He found himself questioning Emily's every move, her late nights at work, her phone notifications, even her smiles. The trust that had once been the foundation of their marriage was now a fragile thread, frayed and worn. One night, after Emily had gone to bed, Daniel sat alone in the living room, scrolling through old photos on his phone. He paused at a picture of him, Emily, and Mark at a barbecue, laughing together. The memory felt tainted now, a painful reminder of what he had lost. "How do I stop feeling like this?" he whispered to himself, his voice breaking. "How do I stop doubting her?" The turning point came unexpectedly. Daniel and Emily were at a family gathering, surrounded by loved ones. Their children were playing in the yard, their laughter filling the air. For a moment, everything felt normal, like the life they had before the affair. But then, Daniel noticed Emily talking to an old friend, a man he didn't recognize. His heart raced, and the familiar wave of suspicion washed over him. He tried to push it aside, but the doubt was too strong. Later that night, as they drove home, Daniel finally spoke up. "Who was that guy you were talking to earlier?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. Emily looked at him, surprised. "That was James, Sarah's cousin. He was just asking about her." "Why?" Daniel clenched the steering wheel, his jaw tight. "I don't know. I can't stop thinking about what happened. About Mark." Emily sighed, her eyes filled with sadness. "Daniel, I know I hurt you. And I know it's going to take time for you to trust me again. But I need you to believe me when I say I'm not that person anymore. I've changed." Daniel didn't respond, but her words stayed with him. That night, he lay awake, thinking about what she had said. Maybe she was right. Maybe he needed to let go of the past if they were ever going to move forward. Forgiveness didn't come easily. It wasn't a single moment, but a series of small steps. Letting go of the anger, choosing to believe in Emily's sincerity, and allowing himself to be vulnerable again. It was the hardest thing Daniel had ever done. One evening, after a particularly emotional therapy session, Daniel turned to Emily. "I forgive you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not because what you did was okay, but because I don't want to carry this pain anymore. I want us to move forward." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise I'll never hurt you again." The road ahead wasn't easy, but Daniel and Emily were determined to make it work. They continued therapy, leaning on each other for support. They celebrated small victories, a day without arguments, a moment of genuine laughter, a shared memory that felt untainted by the past. Their marriage wasn't the same as before, but maybe that was okay. It was stronger in some ways, built on a foundation of honesty and resilience. They had faced the worst and come out the other side, scarred but still standing. As they sat together on the porch one evening, watching their children play in the yard, Daniel felt a sense of peace. The pain was still there, but it no longer consumed him. He had chosen to forgive, not because it was easy, but because he believed in the possibility of a new beginning. Forgiveness was not a one-time event, but a daily choice. For Daniel, it meant waking up every morning and deciding to trust Emily again, even when the memories of her betrayal threatened to overwhelm him. Some days were easier than others. On good days, they laughed together, shared intimate moments, and felt like a team. On bad days, the silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken pain and lingering doubts. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Daniel found himself staring at Emily as she washed dishes in the kitchen. She looked so familiar, yet so different. The woman he had married was still there, but the betrayal had changed her, changed them both. "Do you ever think about it?" Daniel asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Emily paused, her hands still in the soapy water. "Every day," she admitted quietly. "I think about how much I hurt you, how much I hurt us. And I hate myself for it." Daniel nodded, his chest tightening. "I think about it too. But I'm trying to let it go. I need to know that you're all in. That you're not going to hurt me again." Emily turned to face him, her eyes filled with tears. "I am all in, Daniel. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm doing everything I can to earn it back. I love you and I love our family. I'm not going to throw that away again." Their children, Emma and Jake, had started to notice the tension in the house. Emma, the older of the two, was particularly perceptive. One night, she approached Daniel as he sat alone in the living room. "Dad, are you and Mom okay?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Daniel's heart ached at the worry in her eyes. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. "We're okay, sweetheart. Mom and I are just working through some things, but we love each other, and we love you and Jake more than anything." Emma nodded, but her expression was still troubled. "Is it because of Uncle Mark? He hasn't come over in a long time." Daniel hesitated, unsure of how much to share. "Mark made some mistakes, and he hurt our family. That's why he's not around anymore. But Mom and I are doing our best to make things better." "Okay." Emma hugged him again, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, Emma," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. The first real test of their rebuilt trust came when Emily had to attend a work conference out of town. Daniel had agreed to it, but as the day approached, his anxiety grew. The thought of her being away, surrounded by strangers, triggered his insecurities. The night before she left, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, watching her pack. "Are you sure you have to go?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. Emily looked up, her expression softening. "It's just for 2 days, Daniel. I'll be back before you know it." Daniel nodded, but his unease was palpable. Emily walked over and sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "I know this is hard for you, but I need you to trust me. I'm not going to do anything to hurt you again." Daniel took a deep breath, forcing himself to believe her. "I trust you," he said, though the words felt heavy on his tongue. The first night Emily was away, Daniel's phone buzzed late in the evening. It was a video call from her. He answered, relieved to see her face on the screen. "Hey," she said, smiling. "I just wanted to check in. How are you and the kids?" "We're good," Daniel replied, his tension easing slightly. "Jake asked when you're coming home, and Emma made a drawing for you." Emily's eyes lit up. "I can't wait to see it. I miss you guys." They talked for a while, and for the first time since the affair, Daniel felt a sense of peace. Emily was trying, and so was he. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it work. Over time, Daniel and Emily found a new normal. The pain of the past didn't disappear, but it became a part of their story, a chapter they had survived together. They learned to communicate more openly, to lean on each other during difficult moments, and to appreciate the small joys in life. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, Daniel turned to Emily. "Do you think we're stronger now?" he asked. Emily smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I think we're different. But different doesn't have to be bad. We've been through hell, but we're still here. That counts for something, doesn't it?" Daniel nodded, wrapping his arm around her. "Yeah, it counts for everything." As Daniel and Emily continued to rebuild their marriage, they discovered the power of vulnerability. They began to share their deepest fears and insecurities, something they had never done before. One night, as they lay in bed, Daniel opened up about his lingering doubts. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm not enough," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like maybe I wasn't enough for you, and that's why you turned to Mark." Emily turned to face him, her eyes filled with sadness. "Daniel, it was never about you not being enough. It was about me, my selfishness, my weakness. You've always been more than enough. I was the one who failed us." Her words brought tears to Daniel's eyes. For the first time, he felt truly seen and understood. They held each other tightly, their shared vulnerability bringing them closer than ever. Therapy became a cornerstone of their healing process. Their therapist, Dr. Patel, helped them unpack the underlying issues that had contributed to the affair. Emily realized that she had been seeking validation outside her marriage, while Daniel acknowledged that he had been emotionally distant, burying himself in work to avoid confronting their problems. "You both have to take responsibility for the state of your marriage before the affair," Dr. Patel said during one session. "The affair was a symptom, not the root cause. If you want to move forward, you need to address the deeper issues." Daniel and Emily took her words to heart. They began to prioritize their relationship, setting aside time for each other and actively working on their communication. It wasn't easy, but they were committed to the process. As the months passed, Daniel and Emily found themselves falling in love all over again. It was a different kind of love, one that was more mature, more intentional. They celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, reminiscing about the early days of their relationship. "Do you remember our first date?" Emily asked, smiling as she twirled her pasta on her fork. Daniel chuckled. "How could I forget? I spilled wine all over my shirt, and you laughed so hard you snorted." Emily laughed, her eyes sparkling. "I knew right then that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you." Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I'm glad we're here, Emily. It hasn't been easy, but I wouldn't want to go through it with anyone else." Despite their progress, the ghosts of the past still lingered. Mark's absence was a constant reminder of the betrayal, and Daniel occasionally found himself wondering what could have been if the affair had never happened. One day, while cleaning out the garage, he came across an old photo of him, Emily, and Mark at a baseball game. He stared at it for a long time before finally tossing it into the trash. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting," he told himself. "It means choosing to focus on what's ahead instead of what's behind." The story of Daniel and Emily wasn't perfect, but it was real. They had faced one of the greatest challenges a marriage could endure and had come out stronger on the other side. Their love was no longer the naive, idealized version they had started with. It was deeper, more resilient, and rooted in honesty and forgiveness. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching their children play in the yard, Emily turned to Daniel. "Do you think we'll ever stop hurting?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment before answering. "I don't think the hurt will ever completely go away, but it doesn't define us anymore. We've built something new, something stronger. And that's what matters." Emily smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Daniel." "I love you too, Emily," he replied, his voice filled with quiet certainty. Years later, Daniel and Emily looked back on their journey with a sense of pride. They had faced the unimaginable and had chosen to fight for their love. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, a testament to the strength of love, the power of forgiveness, and the resilience of the human spirit. As they watched their children grow, they knew they had given them the greatest gift of all, a family built on honesty, trust, and the courage to start over. As the years passed, Daniel and Emily learned that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up even when the road is rocky. It's about choosing each other, day after day, even when the scars of the past threaten to pull you apart. Their marriage wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, painful, and imperfect. But it was real. And in that reality, they found something far more powerful than the illusion of perfection. A love that had been tested, broken, and rebuilt into something stronger than ever before. Their story is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is hope. That forgiveness, though not easy, can be the bridge to a new beginning. And that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that survive the storm. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this post if it touched your heart. Comment below with your thoughts. Have you ever faced a similar challenge? How did you overcome it? Subscribe or hit the bell button to stay updated on more heartfelt stories like this. Share this with someone who might need a reminder that love, even when broken, can be rebuilt. Your support means the world. Let's keep the conversation going.